Hello, I'm Susan King, the Dean of the School of Journalism and Mass Communication here at UNC Chapel Hill, and I want to welcome one of our Murrow Fellows. We are very proud for the 8th year to host those of you who are part of the Murrow Program, international journalists, to come and see the United States, particularly a university. So I want to introduce you to Mr. I was going to call you a doctor. I was going to raise you up a second.
I wish.
Murtadha Mansoor, a television journalist at the Public Authority for TV and Radio. You've been doing this for about 8 years,
I've been doing this for 8 years, yes.
And you do a number of things, but I know when I spoke to you the other night that you talked about being drawn into the public square to talk in your country, to really bring people into a conversation, etc. So tell me a little bit about what drew you to the role of being in radio and television in your country, Oman.
Yeah, in Oman. Well, in Oman, predominantly, there is only one TV channel at the moment, which is owned and run by the government. Now, it was owned and run by the Ministry of Information, but after the Arab Spring, they decided that there should be a little bit more leniency. So they created the Radio and Television Authority, which is now a quasi-government entity. How that works is that they have funding from the government for 3 years until they can sort everything out and start getting advertisements to basically fund the way TV works here.
Wow.
And I got into it because my English is pretty good. And
I would say.
Yeah, and they had one news broadcast during the day that was in English, and there were foreigners that were basically anchoring the news, and they wanted an Omani face to come in. So I was contacted by, at that time, the Minister of Information to actually come in, sit down and see, do a screening basically and see how it works. So that's how I got into it. But my interest in it started while I was in university. I was in Canada up to September 12th. After September 12th, I had to come back to Oman.
This is 2001?
This is 2001, yes. And the reason why I came back is because I had a very bad experience in university. I got beaten up by some drunk kids because I was an Arab. I spent about 2 weeks in the hospital, and my parents decided that it wasn't worth it. So I came back, joined the American University of Sharjah, which is affiliated with JW, George Washington University, and predominantly UAE national, since it is in the UAE. I ran for elections, and I won by 60% of the votes, became the student council president, the first time a non-UAE national ever got into that position.
Wow.
And since I got into that position, I did a lot of public speaking because I had to address the entire student body. And I started to realize that, yes, I actually did like the limelight. I liked the fact that I could speak to people. And it was a great opportunity when I came back home to join Oman TV. And that's how I got started. Most people get started with radio and turn to TV. I actually got started with TV and then went to radio.
Well, let's get to a couple of basics, and I want to make sure our audience knows Oman, of course, is a sultanate,
yes,
but we don't know that much about Oman, you know. UAE is the United Arab Republic,
yes,
and of course it's also run
Arab
by
Emirates.
Emirates,
yeah,
also run by a sheikh,
yes,
and Dubai and Abu Dhabi are part of UAE.
Yes.
But when you have a government television, which is where you started, what is the role of that government television, and what role do you have in it? Is it the government trying to make sure that the populace understands their mission, or is it a chance for the populace to debate the issues in front of the people?
Now, when you're speaking about governments in the Middle East, you have to be very, very careful because they are very different. There's a very different social and economical structure in every country. Oman, for example,
which is where I was referring.
Which is where I'm from, is a sultanate. The dynasty of Al-Busaid, that's what they're known as, or Al-Said, has been there for a number of years. Very peaceful country. It is probably the only country in the Middle East that has very good relations with Iran and very good relations with the U.S. A couple of months back, the U.S. hikers that were released from Iran were released because our ruler is the one who negotiated on behalf of the U.S. to get them out. And before that, the journalist as well that was in Iran, we negotiated to get them out. Our religious structure is also very different than the rest of the Middle East. So our government is neither Sunni, neither Shia. They're right in the middle. They're known as Ibadis. And it's a very peace-loving country. So when you see the struggle of Sunni, Shia, and other places, you don't see it in the Sultanate. Our government TV channel does not work as a propaganda channel for the government. It does not. That's not the way that it works. It is more of an informative channel. So people would watch the news, so they would get information about what new rules have come out, what's going on in the country. And we are very free to call in any of the ministers, any of the high-ranking officials to come in and openly and freely talk to them about any problems that are there. Not censored, not recorded live. So it is very, very different. That's why there's a misconception in the U.S. that all the Middle East is the same. And every single country in the Middle East has its own dynamics, and they really need to be looked at in a very different way.
But just the fact that you said the Arab Spring changed the dynamic and such, so they made the station a little bit more independent.
This is a funny story. This is what happened. This is what social media plays a big role. When the Arab Spring happened, people did come out protesting in the Sultanate as well, but they were not protesting to get rid of the ruler. They were actually carrying his pictures and chanting for him to stay there, but they wanted reforms in terms of employment. They wanted better wages. They wanted less electricity, less water bills, more subsidies from the government, which is what naturally they should be asking for, because we're an oil-rich nation, and a lot of the money should be going in towards subsidizing some things that are very expensive. And what happens is, at that point of time, the Minister of Information asked the newspapers not to publish anything the next day in the newspapers. And one of the newspapers, which is a daily English newspaper, started off about 2 years ago. It's known as Muscat Daily. The owner of that newspaper called in the minister and told him, it's all over Facebook, it's all over Instagram, so why can't I print my paper? And he said, don't put anything in the newspapers. And he did not print the paper.
About the uprising.
About the protesting, basically.
In the Sultanate.
In the Sultanate.
Gotcha.
So he said, fine, you know what, I'm not going to print a newspaper. And he didn't print the newspaper the next day. Now, His Majesty has a habit of going through all the newspapers every day in the morning. So he apparently, this is what we heard, that he apparently asked, why was Muscat Daily not printed? And when he found out that it was the Minister of Information who had told the newspapers not to print it, first of all, he was replaced straight away with an academic who was actually the Dean of the School of Translation at Sultan Qaboos University. So he was replaced. And the Radio and TV Authority was created to segregate it from the Ministry of Information in order to give journalists more freedom to be able to speak.
Now, why do you think that happens? Because most people in power don't always love that journalists control the conversation. You know, most people in power would like to be the dominant player in the conversation. What do you think the role of radio and television is then in society? How do you think of yourself? What's your role?
My role is to educate the people about things that they might not know about, to pass on the correct information, to make sure that whatever is affecting our society is known to the society. Because sometimes you see some rules are made without the consent of anyone, and people really don't realize how it affects them. So it is very important for us as media people, basically, as personalities on TV, on radio, to ensure that we have an unbiased role that we play, and that we serve both sides. We show the government side of what the government wants to say, and we also show the government the people's side of what people want to say. So that plays a big role in changing the dynamics. Now, in Oman as well, the political structure is very different. We've got what is equivalent to your House of Representatives. We have elected people from different constituents. There is a voting system that goes on. They're elected, and they've been given legislative power now as well for them to be able to lobby and for them to be able to tell the government that we need these laws, and these laws are not correct, they need to be changed. So it is a very different dynamic when you look at Oman on its own. So I think media plays a huge role, especially in educating the people about things that they may not realize, and giving voice to the people so they can share their grievances with people that are in power, so they know what's going on.
I've studied the media in the Arab world, but very superficially. But it had a transformative effect on places when all of a sudden television could link communities together within a country, but also within the region. Did you grow up with television?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
We grew up with everything that you guys watch in the U.S., we have back home as well. So we've grown up with all the shows, we've grown up with all the movies. Not much different than what you have here.
And a robust news debate kind of opportunity as well?
The debate kind of opportunity did not exist until a couple of years, say about four years ago. And one of the reasons was that a lot of, let me just put it in a very nice way, my father's generation did not want to start any trouble. So they would be content with whatever was happening because it didn't really affect them to that extent. I mean, again, coming back from an oil-rich country, a lot of the things that people want to be done are already there, so you're not really worried about it. You've got good infrastructure, you've got free healthcare, free education, so you don't really tend to, fight for a lot of things that you don't really want.
When you're content.
Exactly, when you're content. But with our generation, things have changed. With our generation, what happens is that we don't want more free things. That's how people look at it. We want the education system to get better. We want the healthcare system to get better. We don't want it to stay the way it is. Our countries are evolving, our people are evolving, so the system also needs to evolve with the people.
And as someone who was a student government president, which was sort of your launching pad for your public voice, do you want more power in the hands of those who are not part of the Sultanate, more of a kind of a democratic kind of institution?
Well, you see, again, it comes back to looking at the dynamics in our country. We do have a lot of power. The good thing about our ruler is that he is very perceptive. He came into power 43 years ago. 43 years ago, we had one road that was stretching, which was not very good, full of potholes as well. We had one school, which was only male education, no females were allowed to go, and we had one hospital. At the moment, if you look at the Sultanate, 3 of our major ministries are headed by women, so the ministers are women. They have the full right to vote. We don't have any of this crazy things about women not being able to drive a car. And
like Saudi Arabia.
Like Saudi Arabia. And women not being able to work. We actually have a day that we celebrate, the Omani Women's Day, back home, because it is very important. His Majesty has always said that I can't really remember exactly the quote, but what it goes on to say is that women play a big role in Islamic history, and women play a big role in our lives as our mothers, our sisters, our wives. So if we do not respect them, we do not respect ourselves. So we've always been brought up with that mentality. And again, if you look at the Sultanate, it is very, very different in terms of the role that women play in government, the role that women play in businesses, and the role that they play in society in general. So a very different place.
Now you're married?
Yes, I am.
And have children?
Yes, I have one daughter. She's 6 months old.
Okay, yeah. So a young baby who with a future ahead of her,
yes,
and in your country, of course. And you have a job on the other side and interests. I love the fact that you've even begun a paddleboarding startup company.
Yes.
So very forward-thinking. What is it that you see yourself playing? What role do you see yourself playing in your country in the Middle East? What are the opportunities there? Where do you see yourself growing?
I have an opportunity to get into the government if I wanted to get into the government. I have an opportunity to get into what we call the House of Representatives. It's called the Majlis al-Shura. Shura means basically dialogue, so it's the Council of Dialogue. That's what it's known as. I see that couple of years down the line, I will definitely be getting into more of a role in changing a lot of things in the country, but my focus is on social development. That's where I want to go, and in advocating animal rights, because unfortunately, although in Islam it is taught that in order for you just to be a good person, you have to, we call it rifq bil hayawan, you have to basically see the rights of the animals and treat them properly. Now, a lot of countries in the Middle East don't understand that fact. If you cannot treat an animal properly, how are you going to treat another human being properly? So we're working on advocating a lot of animal rights as well.
So you feel there's much opportunity for your generation?
There's a lot of opportunity for a generation. There's a lot of, our economies are just developing, just opening up. So there are a lot of economic opportunities as well. And there is a big focus on the youth of the country. We've got a very, very young population, really young population.
How young? Like more than 50% under 18?
Yeah, you're talking about maybe, you could say about 50% under 21. That's what you would look at it. So we've got a really young population, and the government is pushing by giving them grants to start their own businesses and very low interest rates, by easing the process of them opening up businesses. So there is a lot of opportunity for young people in the Middle East.
And good education?
Yes, very good education.
Are there enough jobs for those who graduate?
Well, there are enough jobs for those who graduate, but there was an issue for people who did not finish university. So you'd have high school degrees, excuse me, you have high school degrees, and they would tend to want to get really high-paid jobs. So that's another thing that the youth of the Middle East have to understand. For us, for example, from the Sultanate, we're not as rich as the UAE, or as oil-rich as Saudi, or as oil-rich as Qatar. So what happens is when the youth see their friends, because we're very closely related, all of us know each other, all the countries have similar traditions. So they would see someone who graduates in the UAE, for example, is getting triple the amount of money that they would be making. They don't understand that not all social and economical aspects in each country are the same. Yeah. And you have to work hard to get where you want to get. So that's one aspect that people really need to understand. We've been advocating for this for a very long time, going into universities, going into schools, especially those people that are young and have achieved a good amount of things in a very short time. So we've actually put in a group, and it's called the Council of the Youth. Oh. It's funded by the government. We go into schools, we go into different universities, and we speak to them about how we got where we were, or where we are right now. So we're trying to cause a change, but first we need to change the mentality of a lot of the youth, and then hopefully the future is very bright in front of us.
Well, of course, one of the great opportunities for U.S. campuses when we get to host folks like you who are a part of the Murrow Program is we get to know more about these areas where we may have many misconceptions. And we've enjoyed the opportunity to host those from the Middle East because it's an area of, I think, a lot of misunderstanding in America and a very key part. But what's been your big takeaway, being able to be here? You're in Washington, you've been now in Chapel Hill for a while. What would you say you and your colleagues who are from all over the Middle East have enjoyed most in this trip?
Well, we've enjoyed the interaction. We've enjoyed the fact, for a lot of people, it's been very different when we met with Bob Woodward in D.C. And a lot of the questions were about, your sources and when are you supposed to use the source, when are you not supposed to use the source. I think from a journalistic point of view, what we picked up most was the morals that you need being a journalist. Whether a story that would get you a lot of fame, is it going to have an effect on people that are probably serving in different countries in a hostile environment? Is it going to really affect them or not? So those are some of the things that we picked up. But another thing that a lot of us understood, and this is a misconception in the Middle East, if anything goes wrong, the first person or the first people to blame is the American government. That's who you blame. They don't look at it from a different perspective, and the perspective that they should be looking at it from is if the U.S. uses an Air Force base, say, in Kuwait to attack Pakistan or Afghanistan, instead of blaming the U.S., why don't you ask your own government why they allowed the U.S. first to do it? So you should look into your own colors, basically, before you start putting blame in other places.
What's your biggest takeaway this time? You're so well spoken in English. I'm sure you read a lot about the United States. But what's your experience that was different, and what just reaffirmed what you already thought?
The most, I think, the thing that I really picked up on is that U.S. foreign policy and the people in the U.S. are way, way, way apart. And one of the things that I don't like about the way the media works here, it's very focused internally, and I tend to think that they do it on purpose, not to let people know that the interfering sometimes in outside affairs of other countries is not a good idea. I mean, we have this belief, and I was speaking to someone the other day when we had a home visit at someone's house over here, which was a very good experience for us, that the U.S. itself went through a war, a civil war. It fought off basically the British, and there was an ideological change. It took time for people to actually understand what democracy is and how it works, and it was a journey that they went through. But at the moment, what's happening is that the U.S. is coming into Arab countries and trying to just put in that ideology that democracy is good. Each country needs to have its own time, and the people need to have their own time to develop and to understand what kind of a democracy do they want, and what kind of democracy will suit them. And it cannot just be enforced onto the people. It will not work.
Now, Americans usually think that democracy's been so great, it frees people. So they use words like just democracy
Yes.
and freedom. It's more nuanced than that, right?
It is.
So for you, what does freedom mean?
Freedom to me is for me to be able to open up any businesses I want, for me to be able to, I'm a Muslim, if I want to go drink, I can go drink. If I want to party, I can party. I'm not forced to go to the mosque and pray. Freedom is me making a choice in my life to think what is better for me, might not be better for other people. Freedom is being able to just be a human being. That is freedom to me.
I think you'd find that there are many Americans who would share that same vision
They would.
of what freedom is.
They would.
And are you finding you have more in common with the man on the street, as we like to say, American, than you maybe imagined, even though they probably don't know much about your country?
You see, the thing is, this is what I really did pick up. No matter where you go, anywhere in the world, there are certain human values that exist within all human beings. For us to be able to live in peace, we need to concentrate on those human values and not on the superficial things. And if we actually do concentrate on those human values, I don't think that I would have a lot of different ideas or different values than you would. It would basically be the same thing. I would want children not to be hungry. I think you would want the same thing. I'd want everybody to have an equal opportunity. I think you would want the same thing. People are not different. It's governments that are different. Right. I think that's something that we really need to realize.
And I would hope that you'd always feel welcome in whatever community you come into.
I hope so.
Because you'd be treated as an individual,
yes,
and not as a stereotype.
And not as a stereotype.
Of something
yes.
else.
I do want to mention one thing. The start of my trip wasn't so good. I've been to the U.S. a lot of times, and I've never been sidelined for any kind of random check. But this time getting into D.C., I was given a paper that said R on it. And I was taken to a room on the side for a random check. The funniest thing is, if you walked into that room, there was nothing random about it. The only people in that room were people with brown skin. And that is not democracy or freedom to me at all.
I will end with a phrase that I have always loved about America. We're not perfect, but we're perfectible.
Yes.
Discrimination is alive and well, unfortunately, in 2013. But it's a country that is willing to say, we must be better.
Of course.
So I'm glad you're with us. Murtadha
Yes.
Mansoor, journalist from Oman, and I hope you'll come and join us and visit us again.
Definitely we'll come back. I want to thank you for welcoming us at UNC. It's been a wonderful experience. There's actually a lot of us who are looking at starting their master's program at UNC as well. A very welcoming place, and to be very frank with you, it does feel like home. So thank you.
We'll sign you up. You can be a Tar Heel.
Thank you. I'd love to be a Tar Heel.